Okay, so it's noon now, so I guess we're gonna begin. Kwai, Galaswi Gopan. Hello and welcome. My name's Ben, and I go by the pronouns he, him. I'm a graduate student of the Advanced Studio Practice program at the New Brunswick College of Craft and Design. Thanks for everybody for attending today, and especially to our guest speaker, Casey Burkholder. Just a reminder before we begin that this session is being recorded, and so by staying and participating, you are consenting to being recorded. A gentle reminder that you can be seen and heard, so please, if you haven't done so already, you can just turn your microphones to mute to avoid feedback. And if you're experiencing any glitching or anything like that, turning off your video can sometimes help with that. And lastly, I'll just ask for your patience and understanding with the technology as we all try to navigate this delivery mode and change of pace. So to officially begin, we're going to go over to Lee for the territorial acknowledgement.
Thanks, Ben. On this unceded and unsurrendered territory where we live and work, the peace and friendship treaties were signed between 1725 and 1779 by the Elnu, Mi'kmaq, and the Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet, the Passamaquoddy First Nations, and the British. These peace and friendship treaties were among the earliest treaties to be made between Indigenous nations and Western nations. Despite the efforts of the Canadian government since Confederation to assimilate and erase Indigenous peoples through government policies, such as the Indian Act and the Residential Schools Act, the resilience of Indigenous peoples has meant that Indigenous traditions continue to influence the Canadian political, social, cultural, and environmental landscape today.
Thank you, Lee. Now we're going to go over to Allison to tell us about the guest lecture series.
This guest lecture series is sponsored and made possible by the Sheila Hugh Mackay Foundation. It is organized by the Advanced Studio Practice program at the New Brunswick College of Craft and Design in partnership with the Atlantic Center for Creativity. The purpose of the guest lecture series is to model successful contemporary practice to our students and to inform, inspire, and ignite art and design dialogue and engagement in the greater public community. The guest lecture series provides this by giving a platform for presentation, creating time for dialogue, and by celebrating the creative and cultural riches that we hold in Atlantic Canada.
Thank you, Allison. Now we're just going to go over to Tracy to tell us about the ACC.
The Atlantic Center for Creativity is an initiative that promotes creativity across disciplines. It has three main goals. 1, promote research and programming in the area of creativity and innovation. 2, offer events such as symposia, conferences, and workshops on a yearly basis for sharing ideas and information. 3, build partnerships in the area of creativity and innovation on a local, regional, and national basis. You can get additional information and check out the new online journal Creativity Matters by visiting the website atlanticcenterforcreativity.com.
Thank you, Tracy. Now we're going to go over to Amy for our guest speaker introduction.
Dr. Casey Burkholder is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of New Brunswick. Her work focuses on mobilizing DIY media making practices with youth to address issues of concern in local context. Her research focuses on New Brunswick-based DIY activism with queer, trans, and non-binary youth and students. Today's talk is titled DIY Media Making, Activisms, and Community Building Within and Beyond the COVID-19 Pandemic. Over to you, Casey.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for all of those warm welcomes and for such a beautiful and detailed territorial acknowledgement. That's really an important place to begin. So my work with queer, trans, and non-binary youth within this territory, unceded and unsurrendered Wolastoqiyik territory, also now extends into the rest of Atlantic Canada, so covering a lot of different territories, but within the Peace and Friendship Treaty. And one of the things that I want to recognize in doing this work here is that colonialism has disrupted existing gender and sexuality diversity that already existed since time immemorial in this space. And so reclaiming some of that work with queer youth today is something that I find really interesting to do and important through art practice. So I better share my screen with you so you can see my pretty pictures. Pardon me. So today, as was mentioned, I'm going to be talking about DIY or do-it-yourself media making, activism, and community building within and beyond COVID-19. And here I have a screenshot of my website for a project that I'm working on right now with queer, trans, and non-binary youth from all across Atlantic Canada. And this project has changed because of the pandemic. So I thought I might talk a little bit about the process of doing work at a distance in a community-based way when you can't actually be together. So I'm a participatory visual researcher, which means that I work with people together through art practice in order to, respond to a prompt in some way. And generally this is done face-to-face in small groups, all together, talking about and creating pieces in response to a prompt. But we can't do that right now. So what have we done instead? This is what I'm going to talk to you about today in talking about this project that's called Prideswell. So let's do it. So yeah, the context is this project, Prideswell, an art and activism summit for 2 LGBTQ+ youth in Atlantic Canada. Last year, before the pandemic, I had this idea to think about how we might work with young people who are queer, trans, and non-binary in Atlantic Canada to think about creating art, yes, but also archiving in a youth forward way and exhibiting the works in a way that made sense to youth. And so the idea for this project was to bring 25 people from all over Atlantic Canada to Fredericton for a weekend where we would make cell films, which are cell phones plus video making plus an intention, and stencils and zines, those kinds of sort of do-it-yourself media. And the idea was to first create the media together and then think about how we might create a traveling exhibition that could go to spaces that meant something to these youth. For example, libraries or schools or wherever. I don't know where we would have done it because we didn't get to do it because the pandemic happened. And so then we thought, how could we still think about bringing sort of like a youth-focused, queer youth-focused approach to making and to exhibiting and archiving the work. And so we decided not to meet, obviously. We decided instead to do a mail-based art making project. And so what we do every month is first I sought participants through Facebook and things like that. And I found 25 people. And then we decided to grow the project to 60 participants. And so once a month, I send people a physical package of art supplies and a prompt. And then I ask them to do something, a particular practice. So in August, we made collage. In September, we made zines. And this month, we're making masks, like do-it-yourself face masks, sewing them all by yourself that say something. And so I thought I would share a couple of the pieces that we've done together, but I'm thinking through as from like an academic perspective and how I'm going to write about the project later is this idea of like, what are the affordances and tensions to engaging 2 LGBTQ+ youth in art making at a distance? Like in what ways does doing this work address some things that couldn't have been addressed if we met together? And then in what ways does it kind of change it? So one of the goals of the project, of course, was to create networks of community with people who may not otherwise know each other by coming here together. So how can we do that in a kind of digital way now, like through monthly Zoom meetings where we talk about making or we analyze what it is that we've made. It's so different, but I think it's rich for now. but I still think that I'd like to incorporate an in-person component to the work should the pandemic end in a timely-ish manner. I mean, fingers crossed. Yeah, so those are some of the things that I've been thinking about in the work. But what brought me to this particular work is I came here in 2017 as a doctoral student, and I got a job at the University of New Brunswick. And my doctoral work was all about media making with ethnic minority youth in Hong Kong. And so in that work, I worked with my former students, I used to be a teacher in Hong Kong, to make short documentaries on cell phones about their experiences of identity and belonging and sort of sense of activist practice within the context of the Umbrella Revolution in Hong Kong, which was basically a youth-led protest looking for democracy. So the works there responded to this idea of like, what does it mean to be an ethnic minority within the context of Hong Kong? And what is my identity? Where do I feel a sense of belonging? And then how do I engage in activism as a young person? And so, okay, I finished that project, but now I'm living in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where I don't know anybody. And I'm like, what do I do now? How do I take the kind of interest and methodology in the doing of research or in making art with young people and turn it to this place? And so I tried to put together sort of like a girl-focused summit where I would look at issues of like gender and gender-based violence, things like that with young girls. This is what I assumed I might move forward doing. So I put out a call for participants, and immediately a parent was like, hey, I think my kid would like to be a part of your project, but they're not a girl, they're non-binary. And like, why would you only work with girls? And I thought like, oh yeah, of course. Like, what am I thinking? I didn't mean to be gendered and like binary and gross at all. That's not at all what I was doing. So I adapted the project completely based on who was interested in making art and talking about their realities. And so that's sort of how I got here to this particular project. It started with working with youth and it has continued. So the participants that I began working with, 3 years ago, continue to be a part of this new project in a different way, sort of giving advice about the methods of art that we should be doing, giving advice about how we might organize people. So they're more like the people that were participants at that time are now more like an advisory council, sort of advising how the practice can go forward. And that's the participatory sort of component of this practice. And participatory really is just like working together. And this work is usually focused on making change in some way. It can be like a local change or it can be a policy change. That's sort of what it's about. So that's that. I was thinking like, what would this class be interested in hearing about? Probably not about a long literature review, about research. That's probably boring, but I thought you might be interested in hearing a little bit about process, like how this is going about, maybe. And so I thought I could talk a little bit about how I taught the process of collage in these like monthly packages with a 2-sheet of paper. And so I was like, how can I communicate how you can do collage in a sort of quick way, in a thoughtful way with young people? And so for this first one, I was like, I will show a lot of images, I will give a lot of supplies, and I will try to show that there's a breadth of things you can do for collage, but really it's about experimentation, which also is what drew me to using collage in the first art practice with these young people that I didn't yet know. Because I thought, with collage, for me, one of the things that's more difficult is knowing when I'm finished, like if something has too much or like if I should pull back. But it's okay. If you make a mistake, you can cover it up. You can paste on top, you can rip something, you can not worry about being an expert in the method. And so that's why we did that collage. And so the first collage project was about this prompt, finding community during COVID-19. And so I wanted to get a sense of how young people could use art making to respond to this particular question. And so I sent them, does anyone know, if you're in Fredericton, there's this really great vintage antique store called Chase Benjamin Antiques. And Chase Benjamin Antiques put together 60 collage packs for our project. And so people had kind of similar imagery to work with. They had usually like a vintage sewing pattern, googly eyes, a map, a few pages of comic books. What else was there? And just like strange spelling books. There was a couple of pieces of text. So people had similar kinds of visuals, similar kind of palettes, but what they came out with were really, really different things based on their experience. And so in these sort of like 4 steps, I tried to share with young people what they might choose to do. And of course, they did things that totally blew me away. So what I'm going to get us to do now is take a look at a couple of pieces without the author's statement, and maybe either through the text function, if you'd like to write a response about what it makes you feel or what it makes you think, or if you'd like to speak out loud, that's also amazing. So I'm going to show you a piece, and I want you to think about how you understand it in relation to the prompt, which is finding community during COVID-19. Because one of the things as a researcher I'm really interested in is audiencing, how audiences take up pieces when participants are around, when they're not around, etc. Okay, you ready for this? The prompt again, finding community against COVID-19. Here is the first piece. And so I want you to take a look at this piece and tell me what you are thinking about, or what sticks out to you, or how you make meaning from what you see here. And again, you can text it if you don't feel comfy in the chat, or you can speak out loud. Okay, I see family. Okay, I see mothering as community. Words that come to my mind like care.
I was thinking caring, sharing, comforting,
Yes.
loving, community. I really like the collage.
Yeah.
It's quite beautiful. So thank you for that.
For sure. I did not make it. This is made by a participant named Dominica, who lives in Nova Scotia.
Thanks for sharing.
For sure. Inclusion and caring, comforting. Okay, I'm going to share with you now Dominica's words that will contextualize the piece, and then we'll go back and look at it again, just briefly. Okay. My mother and I had only each other in quarantine, but she was a frontline worker. We tried to avoid each other in her small bachelor apartment, staying on opposite sides of the same one-room unit in an attempt to keep each other safe. It didn't work. When public health called to say that we had tested positive for COVID-19, all we asked was if we could finally hug each other again. So I'm going to take us back, and I want us to look at it, again. And if anyone has any comments that they'd like to say out loud, or if they'd like to put it in the chat again, I'm happy to read it out loud. So what do you see now with the context? Does it change the meaning? Does it make it different?
My comments remain. I'm happy to hear the story behind, although not because of COVID. But I think that the person that created this hit it. You know, they told their story visually, and it's very direct and very clear. And to add the extra COVID understanding of just wanting to hug each other, which is understandable in these difficult times. So yeah, I remain the same, basically. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was also so amazed with the way that Dominica also used the directions themselves as part of the shirt for the child figure in the piece. Just in terms of the repurposing of materials, I'm always really inspired, especially when people reuse something that I don't expect. Okay, we're gonna do it again with another piece. This piece is called Queer Mother. And again, I want you to take a look And then tell me what you think in the comments or out loud. Okay. Okay, I see childhood. It's like all the pieces coming together as one. Strong mother, Alice in Wonderland-ish. Okay, let's look at the context. Oh, the visual language speaks to infographics, and the manual and a child's comics combined is really interesting. Okay, so let's see what the artist had to say. This is from Vedi Abe. I wanted to showcase the importance of having a family during current chaotic state the world is in. I chose a family led by a queer mother to demonstrate how many queer individuals create their own family and listen to the wisdom of many older members of the gay community. So let's go back and look again just for fun. Has anything shifted for you, or does the meaning change, or is it deepened in any way from hearing from the maker? Yeah, one person is saying chaos, not fitting in. The pink is interesting. And another says, I like the comment saying everyone was looking at the mother. I didn't notice that at first. Yeah, when I first saw it, I looked at queer mother, the words, and then I looked at the mother, but I didn't notice the people surrounding in the circle until I really looked again. All right. So this is one more that I'd like us to do. What do we see here? And again, the prompt was finding community amidst COVID-19. What do we see here? Okay, life disrupted, the constant cell phone use, mix of feelings. Challenge and distance. Global interconnections. Just because they can't be next to each other doesn't mean they can't connect in another way, or the challenge of making a family. Scribbling is a powerful addition, distractions, pressures. Okay, let's see what the maker has said about the piece. Oh gosh. During the beginning of COVID hitting Newfoundland, I'd just gotten off work due to needing a mental health break, so I was planning to be home every day for 2 months anyway. Those beginning couple months were tough for many people, but it was a time of relief for me as I suddenly had little to no responsibility. I finally had time to focus on my hobbies, like getting back into art and playing video games. I played Animal Crossing online with my sister, who I do not live with, and brother, who lives across the country, as well as play Dungeons and Dragons online with my friends. We were all able to see each other and hang out in a virtual world, which was comforting, especially during such scary times. I was also lucky to have already been living with my partner, so we weren't separated like a lot of relationships sadly were. The craziness of the world ended up normalizing my mental state enough to calm me once again. And so let's go back and look at it again and see if there's anything that you take away from the piece now after hearing from the maker. Yeah, very calm in the middle with everything going around it. And the chaos is all outside of the phone. Yeah, I know. So a lot of the participants, and you're welcome to see, we have something like, I think 41 that are publicly shared on our website, which is prideswell.org. But a lot of the participants were saying that the digital world was, it was something that was challenging for them. But this participant in particular was saying like, no, 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 that was my safe haven. This was an important space for me. So yeah, the chaos is outside of the phone. The bubbles of people do seem happy in the chaos. And yeah, seeing chaos outside of the phone is really interesting. And again, that was really different than what other folks were saying. All right, so that's what we did in August. And then we met on Zoom in September and sort of broke down what we thought, sort of doing what we're doing here, which is looking at the pieces and saying like, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you think? And then we talked about the process of our next piece, which was to make zines or short DIY print publications. And I've always loved zines. Zines are for sure my medium for myself. Like they're my absolute favorite. And so for the zines, again, I'll focus on the process for a moment. I wanted us to think intersectionally about the 2 LGBTQ plus community in Atlantic Canada, because I think a lot of times when we think about who is participating in these kinds of projects, it's often people who are cis and white, and that's not the case in this project at all. And so what we wanted to do was think about a really expansive understanding of who 2 LGBTQ plus people are in Atlantic Canada through art making. So the idea is I am this and this and this, and trying to do that with young people through zine making. So they start with brainstorming and then they figure out how they want to interpret that in a particular way. We're just going to look at two. One I've broken down page by page, and it includes a swear word, which I'm going to say, but just if that offends you, plug your ears. And then I'm going to show you another one, which is a short video of the person doing it. And then I think we can talk about them in conversation when it's over. So for now, I'm going to ask you to look and I'll read it out loud, and then we're going to talk about each piece. Let's go. So again, the prompt is I am this and this and this. So here's the first one by Flynn Zander, who is from PEI. Okay, so what did we understand or what did we see in this particular piece? What jumped out to you? How did you understand the prompt? Were there any parts that really resonated with you or made you feel or think something? You can say it in the comments or you can say it out loud, up to you. Yeah, you saw who they were inside. Anything else? The piece that really jumps out to me is the part where there are components that are hidden and then they open up and you get to learn more. The flowers at the back of the book are small, but they represent growth. That's a lovely point. Being scared in a small town must be really hard. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, for sure. Any other responses? I love the ideal me in the midst of such fear, and the flip action is really good. I love the flip. Yeah, how they feel safe and unsafe seemed the largest. That's a really wonderful point. Yeah, I think there's a kind of reclaiming too in the making of the zine where you can identify things that are making you feel scared, but then also being able to take charge over them too. And then here in quarantine, we may feel stuck, unable to even travel. So to be somewhere you don't feel comfortable, that's a really important point. So we have this piece here from a 16-year-old, and then we have another 16-year-old next, and I'm going to read the zine, and each page is going to take up its own slide. And then we're going to talk about that one as well. And then I'd like to talk about them together, because why not? So this one is called Despite It All, Motherfucking Sparkle by Bliss. I'm trans and Jewish and gay, and I'm weird, apparently. Ever since I was young, friends told me I was weird, and I always thought in the back of my head, that's cute, but honey, you're the weird one. Clearly, I'm also very confident. Still, there's a lot I'm not brave enough to do yet. I'm accepted for who I am by almost everyone I know, but I water myself down so I'm palatable to the public. Being queer in New Brunswick, it's tolerated, but it's not celebrated. When I was 11 years old, I was wonderfully confident, obliviously so. It felt so natural to me wearing a black tutu while playing the meanest game of floor hockey. It felt right to sparkle. I actually painted a big unicorn on my wall that said, motherfucking sparkle. I knew it then, but for 5 years I forgot that these are words to live by. I always loved to push the envelope. Prior to coming out, when I was a girl, I stopped shaving my armpits. I then wore a tank top to school and raised my hand to answer every question, proudly displaying my feminism. This wasn't well received, and later some kids put a razor in my locker. Before this moment, I hadn't cared that I was thoroughly different. Sometimes I'd be sitting on one end of the classroom while everyone else was on the opposite side, but it didn't faze me. I was just minding my own business. The next year I moved to a different school. I started shaving and I never raised my hand in class. For a few years, I went in and out of trying to be quote unquote normal, and other times doing the exact opposite. My self-worth took a beating. I felt my personality being slowly eroded by the waves of convention. I had a clear vision of wanting to be a man in a dress. I remember I thought to myself, quote, I'll be repulsive if I do that. How could anyone love me or be attracted to me, unquote. I was quite ignorant to queer culture. I had a loose idea of it, and I wasn't sure if that's where I belonged either. I still don't quite have the bravery to wear a dress. I'm starting to rebuild my confidence and happiness. I remember when I was little looking up to any fierce gay guy I met and wishing I could be like them. The beauty and confidence, how they hold themselves like royalty. I realize now it takes a lot of strength to be them. We as queer people have to be so sure of ourselves. We have to be our own cheerleaders. I realize now I too am a strong gay man. I deserve to be myself because I was born here and this is my home. And what is a home if you don't feel like you belong in it? I love and respect the people of New Brunswick. Respect meaning I will not make assumptions on their belief systems. I expect them to be able to handle this. If they can't, it's their loss. But it's a gain for every queer child who has ever thought they couldn't be their authentic self. Thanks for reading, and remember to keep on motherfucking sparkling. Any thoughts? What did you see in this? What did you hear? Okay, I love the first full image. Clearly they are aware of their whole self, but seem to represent themselves in smaller pieces so the public can only take on small bits at a time. I love that they're still holding themselves together. What is a home if you feel you don't belong in it? Powerful. And the tree represents inner growth. Yeah. Obviously I love this. Like I could show any of the pieces and I love them all. They're like my children, but I mean, the pieces are like my children, but I really like these two pieces and thinking about them together and the complexity of adolescence and how on the one hand, sometimes you like can't stand yourself and you're afraid. And then on the other hand, you know, you're always confident too, like you're all of these things. I really like the pieces sort of in conversation with one another too, both giving an example of the complexity of being 2 LGBTQ plus in Atlantic Canada, in PEI, in New Brunswick, all over. But it's really interesting. And one of the things I've been thinking about in the project is that if we had just met for a weekend, because that's what I could afford in the grant, if we'd met for a weekend, would we have been able to do all of these things and share in the same kind of like deep way? And I think probably not. I think there's something really exciting about the way that switching the project to being in the male and sending people, like there's a participant who's in a really small town in Labrador that I have to send their package a week earlier because they only get mail service twice a week. So it's like really exciting to think about how all of these folks can be creating community through art making and being so, I guess, intimate. And I noticed that one person suggested that they'd like a copy of this. And I think that Bliss is thinking about making this zine available places. And so if Bliss decides to make it available, aside from being online, because we do have it on our website, but I will let you know. And then someone here is saying, oh yeah, you don't have to be shy, you only have time to sparkle, and that they've lived by it. That's so lovely. Yeah, I love all of this. Thank you so much for your comments on the participants' work. I'm like, sometimes I think my job is truly the greatest job in the world. Just the idea of giving folks art supplies and ideas, and then they just do whatever they want with it. It's kind of amazing. Okay, so what's next? As I briefly mentioned, next we're going to be making, oh, I can turn the volume down. Next, we're going to be making face masks. And so I created a tutorial of how to make a face mask about the notion of staying safe but never silent. And the reason that I'm so excited about this particular idea right now is that, like, wearing a mask can be very powerful, especially if you're showing the world something that you believe in. But it's also a way to demonstrate community care, right? Like, you're wearing a mask, so you're protecting your neighbors and the folks that you pass on the street. And I think there's something really exciting about that you're using the mask to stay safe, but then again, never silent. And so this one is my example. And I made my mask in support of Clinic 554, which, if you're living in Fredericton, you know, has closed for the time being, which is really terrible, terrible news. But anyway, we're not done fighting, so let's keep fighting for that too. Anyway, art activism, working with youth, I love it all. Thank you all so much for listening to me and taking a look at some of these pieces and having giving your feedback on what young people have done too. I really appreciate your time for listening, and I'm here if you have any questions. Okay, thanks.
What is Clinic 554? Maybe you could describe that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. Clinic 554 is a family practice. It was on Brunswick Street, or King, I can't think of the street. Anyway, on Brunswick in Fredericton. And it was run by Adrian Edgar, who's a doctor, and they provide both trans healthcare as well as providing abortion access. And so one of the things that the clinic did was they didn't turn people away if they sought an abortion, and they didn't have the financial means to cover it through paying for it. And so losing Clinic 554 means, you know, losing trans-affirming and trans-affirming healthcare, as well as losing reproductive access in the city and really for the province. It's a real shame. Any other questions?
I do have a question. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that. That was amazing. And regarding the research, I'm interested to know what kind of research method you use. It was an art-based plus something else, or it was just an art-based research?
So I call it participatory, well, not just me, but it's called participatory visual research. And so the idea is that you work together, that's the participatory, through the visual, which in this case is collage and zines, and then sewing, to research a particular question. So the data that comes from it is the art products, as well as the conversations about what we have made, as well as I have surveys and things about where would you like to display this and why? What did you understand? So all of the kind of conversations that come out of it is also data. But broadly, it's participatory visual research.
Thank you. And did you find it was hard to find participants for the research, and how did you go about that?
That's a great question. Usually I find it really difficult to find participants. But this time I made a poster and shared it on Facebook, and then other groups in Atlantic Canada shared it. In particular, some groups in Newfoundland about like 2 LGBTQ plus youth organizing, Pride PEI, Pride New Brunswick, these kinds of groups shared my call for participants. And so we quickly went from 5 participants to 25, which we thought would be the maximum. But then in speaking with the 25 people, we said there are actually another 35 people who want to be a part of the project. Is it okay if we make it bigger than just this group? And the 25 said yes. So in short, social media is how we found participants for the project.
Great. Yeah, I'll just ask you if you could put one more time the address of the website. I would love to check it out. Thank you.
Sure, I'll put it on the group chat.
Casey, thank you so much for that meaningful talk that has such deep significance, I think, for so many people. And I think I'd seen, Jen Lee put a comment in there too about you are creating that safe space, and in a way, even a home-like space for people to be able to have those conversations and to be able to share their thoughts. And on that note, I was thinking about how when participants would enter into those discussions and rise to the challenge of doing these projects, I'm wondering, well, like you can see that it most certainly must contribute to a sense of belonging and community, that when the projects eventually finish, what do you do with that? Like how do they want to move forward, or is there a sense of the legacy of something much bigger that it's built?
That's a great question. I think initially what we'd like to do, if the pandemic allows it, is have sort of like hub meetings, like a New Brunswick hub meeting, a PEI hub meeting, a Nova Scotia, Newfoundland hub meeting, and then see how we might have like provincially, because it's easier for me to move to those places than have all those people come here, because it's that's not possible. But I'm really interested in, as a legacy, aside from the website, what else can we do? Like, should we find gallery spaces? One of my collaborators, April Mandrona, works at NASCAD. And so there's a gallery there that we can, work with. But then also the university or colleges, they're not always the most accessible spaces for community members. And so what can we do? Like, libraries to me seem like a better spot. Or, what do the youth think? So that's what we're going to keep talking about. But for now, because of the pandemic, we are sharing things on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and then on our website. And so sometimes participants will say, I don't want this one on Facebook, but yes, you can put it on the website. Or they might say, this one I only want to share when we do our monthly Zoom call, so other people in the project can see, but I don't want to put it out there. Or I had a participant this month that said, for my zine, you can put every page except for this page, because they had a page about how their parent often misgenders them and they find it really difficult and hard, but they didn't want to call out their parent on social media. So they were like, you can share these pieces, but not that piece. So I think there's something in terms of the research part about navigating the consent processes in terms of exhibition and archiving in a participatory way.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
Creating these pieces, the participants are definitely putting themselves out there. And I'm wondering what kind of feedback environment, what do they get back? They put this whole personal thing out there. What comes back to them? What process do you have to validate them?
Well, I think certainly like when we share them online, people will like them or add their responses sometimes. Some of the pieces receive more public feedback, I think, than others. I have a process where if people write anything hateful or violent, that I delete them, and I'm responsible for doing that work as the facilitator because I don't want to do additional violence to the participants. But in terms of when they send me things, I'm always like, this is amazing. I love this particular component of the, you know, like I'm a teacher at heart.
So it's a one-to-one relationship, them to you, not to a larger group?
They send the pieces to me and I post them, but we also have a larger group meeting, and that's where we talk about the pieces as a group. And those are on Zoom once a month. But yeah, people are also and then, you know, like so far so good. So far it hasn't been there hasn't been anything transphobic or homophobic yet, and let's hope it stays that way. But it's the internet, so you never know.
Yeah, I know. It's risky.
Yeah, but there's something really, I think, provocative and political about just putting yourself out there. Many of the participants use pseudonyms as well. Some don't, but some do, so that has a layer of quote unquote safety. They can't be identified. Like Flynn Zander, for example, is a participant chosen name. Vadia Bay is the same. But then some participants use their real names. Yeah, I never thought I'd be doing so much web design as a professor, but here we are.
Casey, when you talked about could the same thing have been achieved within a weekend workshop, and you kind of answered that by concluding possibly not. And when you asked that question, I thought myself too, yeah, I don't think it could. There's something, I think, in the reflexivity that arrives when you work within those processes of the handmade and the collage that require slower thinking processes. And then you get to like the ideas percolate and they ruminate. And so you go back and forth. And I guess as we're used to seeing maybe that process through our class assignments and through making and doing, but the mixed media collage-based activities and the mixed media classes in diploma, and maybe Lee can speak to this too, seem to always become this space that students arrive at, that they feel this medium, they can talk about deeply personal experiences, and also address their identity in ways, the cutting and the making and reassembling and reinventing things that speak to your ideas and your identity. It comes to the surface. Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm a teacher. I'm not afraid of silence.
I do see Kathy has said, please share my comments with the presenter, as I don't know how to share tried comments with this group. But I don't see the comment following it. I don't know if Kathy's there, if she would like to share.
I made a number of comments, so I don't know where they all are, but for some reason, I can only share them with Jean. So I'll kind of zip through, maybe. See if I can find them.
Or if you want to voice them now, that would be
just trying to see what I said. Okay. On one comment, I put, there's a different sense of the relationship of the images with the background. That was the one where they had disparate images and a lot of background imagery. So it's a telling and a different story. That was my comment there. And the comment on that last one that you showed us, it was hurt, pain. I put hurt, pain, and inability to feel free for who they are. That was how I felt about it. And then just me asking Jean how to share my comments, because I don't know why I can only share it with privately with 3 people, and I'm not sure why that is. Okay. Then I put, I like that it concluded with celebration and regaining the confidence, because it seemed very celebratory. And good that this person has art to express. And that was on that last piece that you showed. And great work to give these young people an outlet through art projects for their thoughts about who they are. And just asking to share my comments with the presenter, because I have no clue on why on mine I only have 3 people I can share with. Shauna, great comment, because Shauna made a good comment before that. And I think maybe that was it. Yeah, because on mine, I only have the ability to share with Jean, Casey, and Benjamin, and that's it. I have no way to be able to share it with the group, and I'm not sure how to change that. So if anybody has a good idea, I'm open to suggestion. But anyway, at least I got, thanks, Jean, for giving me a moment to share with the group, because I have no clue.
It is a little difficult navigating the technology. There should be like a drop-down menu where you can share comments privately, or you can direct them to others. So I don't know, maybe we can do a bit of research for next week, or maybe address that later, like how to work the chat window.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. I was just going back to Jean's, this is Jen Lee, Jean's comment about expression, and I think the freedom and safety for self-expression through DIY art activities. I feel like it's a challenge at an art school sometimes to embrace that methodology, because we spend so much time perfecting our craft and trying to be perfect and trying to, there's a safety in just doing something that you think is, quote unquote, good, or in a certain way, without breaking boundaries and experimenting and, all the things that you're doing. I feel sometimes we have barriers to getting students and even getting ourselves to just kind of throw ourselves into that sort of aesthetic.
I think that's really interesting, because sometimes I feel when I produce work, like with a cell phone, for example, it will never be taken as seriously as a film documentary, even though it's like taking on the same concepts, or it's exploring something even in an interesting visual way. But because of the DIY nature of the work, it's never like, I would never call myself an artist, but I make all of this stuff. There's something about there's more experimentation maybe in DIY, but also it's taken less seriously as visual products, I would say.
I don't agree with you. And I think there's a whole lot of room for that aesthetic in contemporary practice. We often show Linda Berry's examples of her, sort of activities and challenges to her students for creating zines, basically, right? And that's the spirit of what she does too, is kind of what you're doing, I'm observing.
Well, that's very complimentary. love Linda Berry.
But I think using that aesthetic too can be very subversive. It's kind of like a two-fingered salute to the system that says this is acceptable art, and this is what, like, how one should be behaving and producing work. So the action itself is yeah, it's resistance to what art should be. So yeah, it works.
It works I think it works in a way today that it actually is more powerful than working within the silo of any particular like oil painting or whatever, right? There's something really challenging about this kind of grassroots initiative.
I noticed in the comments, Matt asks what's happening next. And we're deciding month by month about the next art practice. So people are currently making masks, but the next art practice is making dioramas. But like, how do you send a box in the mail? I can't, but I'm sending either a wooden or a glittery canvas and asking folks to make the diorama on the inside. And the prompt is going to be queer environmental futures, which is a concept that my colleague and good friend Sabine Labelle has identified, which is really like queering the idea of the environmental crisis and the future. So it's sort of finding a place between dystopia and utopia and thinking forward about what climate futures might be and what queer futures might be. So that's what we're going to do in November. And for that, I've gathered like leaves from my yard to go in the art packages, the canvases, glue and beads and all sorts of garbage. I feel like the dollar store is being enriched by my art practice, which is kind of gross, but also, what can you do? 60 people, you got to send them a lot of things. Got to be cheap. And then what is the age range? It's 15 to 25.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And am I following the Tiny Pricks project? Not yet. But I must be. I was thinking of a folded flat box. I was thinking of that, but then I have this idea that eventually we're going to make cell phones, like short films on cell phones. And so I want them to have a lot of stuff to be the background. And so I was thinking that like the size of the canvases that I have would be easier to film than a box, which is more difficult to film. But I'm just thinking forward. But I also did think that a folded box would be good. Anyway, this could be a mail disaster. We'll see.
I wanted to just make a comment because you were talking, Casey, about doing research in the field. And I want to mention to Nancy Nickel, she's Professor Emeritus from York University from art and art history. She's the person in Canada who's made the most films, most videos on LGBTQ rights. And she did the history of gay and lesbian rights in the Toronto area, for example. And she's just done an awful lot of videos. So that might be somebody that you might want to look up just to see if that could help inform your research or the types of projects that you might want to do. You could even just show a clip, when you're starting a project or something like that. So I highly recommend that you look her up because she's done work for gay rights. She did research and filming in Africa, the Caribbean, in India, and in Canada. So she's somebody that you might want to take a look at because she can help inform the types of projects and things that you're doing. So I just want to throw that out for you.
Thank you. Sounds like that's it, Jean.
I think so. And I'm going to, I think, Ben, do you have anything you wanted to say or wrap up?
Yeah. So I guess I'll just say thank you to everybody for attending, and just a reminder that next week's talk is on October 15th, and it's going to be with Danielle Hogan. So Waleewan, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to you, Casey, today. That was a fantastic talk. We're very, very grateful. It's been wonderful to have you here. And I'd also like to thank Ben for hosting, and to all of the ASP students for organizing this today and for doing a wonderful job. This talk will be available in our archive very soon. That's being worked on. And if you have signed up and if you are watching our webpage where the talks are posted, you'll see notices of how to get access to these video talks when they become available. So thank you to everybody. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Bravo!